What's the worst thing that's happened to one of your friends? In high school, a friend of mine was stopped at an intersection when some lady rear-ended him. She was dicking with her phone and didn't even slow down. This pushed his vehicle through the intersection and pinned a girl waiting for the bus against a telephone pole, where she died. He was helping an elderly couple with chores around the house to help support his new family. They had 2 adult children. They were both in town at the time. The son shot his sister, his parents, and then my friend, and put the gun in his hand and pinned it all on him. Didn't take long to prove who done it, but not after his name was tarnished. Finished a workout at the gym and collapsed on his way out. Brain aneurysm. He was dead 6 days later. She worked as a bartender and her fiancé came in drunk out of his mind and acting strange. She had to tell him she couldn't serve him. He left upset. She went home a few hours later and found him trying to rape her teen daughter. She fought him. He cut open her face from forehead to chin. She said she could see her facial bones. He held them hostage for hours. She knocked him out with a bat and carried her daughter, banging on all the neighbors' doors. Finally someone opened up and got the cops. He was on the run for a while but finally caught. Was sentenced to 58 years. She has a huge deep scar on her face. Her daughter is still a sweet young lady who has kept a positive mindset. She was cycling through London and a bus hit her so hard she came off, landed on head, and died. She was also quite literally the last member of her family. Both her parents were only childs and had both died of cancer, and she had no siblings. Her death was the end of her family tree. She was 23. I had a friend who I went through elementary school and middle schools with. He moved away in the middle of 7th grade and our friend group was heartbroken, but figured we'd see him again. Last week, he was shot in the head by his friend who was showing him a gun and pointed it at him as a joke. He was 18. Tried to swim to shore from a sailboat in Lake Michigan. She was a strong swimmer, but even in the summer hypothermia is a threat. They didn't find her body for several days, and during that time famous fake psychic Sylvia Brown told the family she was alive and being held on a boat against her will. She killed herself after she found out she was pregnant. We hadn't even been out of high school for a year. I couldn't go to her funeral because I was training in the army. I still dream about her sometimes. One of my best friends in high school was murdered when he opened the back door of the Little Caesars we worked for when someone knocked. It was after closing on a Sunday, and he probably expected it to be one of our friends coming by to toke up. He was one of the coolest, most chill guys you'd ever meet, and he took a shotgun to the face that night. Nothing crazy, not death. Moved to New York City with my best friend from college when we were both 22. Got an apartment together, struggled to get jobs together, were basically living our best lives as young, broke girls in the big city. One day she's in a coffee shop using Wi-Fi and a dude comes up to her and starts chatting. He's a lot older, late 40s, but seems nice and asks for her number. Eventually she gives it to him. He calls, takes her to dinner at this sushi place, spends like $800. He starts taking her out every weekend, spending massive amounts of money. Eventually she just doesn't come home on weekends. Then, she doesn't come home during the week. I'm constantly checking in with her to see how she's doing since she basically moved in with him after 3 months, and it all seems weird to me. She says she's fine, but tells me to stop calling so much as he doesn't like her spending a ton of time on the phone with her friends. 6 months later, he proposes. She accepts. That was in October. They had a wedding planned for the summer, but it's been cancelled due to COVID, so they did a quickie courthouse wedding on a road trip in May. Last month, she announced she is pregnant. She didn't call me, I found out on Instagram. I messaged her on X saying congratulations, and she said thanks, that it was all happening so fast and she didn't know if she was really ready for marriage and kids. But because he was so much older, it made the most sense to do it all right away. She said if I want to talk more, to do it through Instagram messaging, as he generally finds out about stuff she says over text. Moved to NYC with best friend. Within 18 months she's married and pumping out kids she doesn't want yet, with a way older creepy rich dude who doesn't let her talk to me. He and his brother were away at college. His father fell asleep with a cigar in hand, and the house began to burn. So far as could be determined, the father woke, went to get his wife, carried her downstairs, and made it to within a couple feet of the door. They both died, and the house was destroyed. He broke several bones as a child. At age 9 he was hit by a car and shattered his pelvis. Then in school on the first day of 5th grade he fell off the monkey bars and broke both arms in a gruesome manner. He killed himself freshman year of college. God knows why. We think a friend figured out why he did it, but we don't ask. Because he took the hardest part. He wasn't the one who found him, but since he was his best friend, the family called him and he saw him hanging. He was the one who retraced his steps in those last hours. My friend had another good friend of ours die in his arms after being shot 3 times from a drive-by. Even to this day, 9 years later, he feels like that they were meant for him and lives with some guilt. Gang raped by multiple players and coaches of my university's basketball team who had a trafficking ring. Her life was threatened to ensure she didn't tell anyone, and she was stalked. Police botched the investigation, and the university covered it up. All of her rapists transferred schools. It boils my blood knowing they all walked free and are potentially abusing other women. My friend lost her husband after he developed some blood clots. Then 5 months later her 2 kids were killed in a car accident. She wasn't really my friend. We just started talking at a birthday party and hit it off. I remember one time, I was about maybe 10 or 11. I didn't know anyone there. I was at a birthday party. My grandma was there, so she brought me along. I had fun, and when it was a little later, around 9:30 or so, I was sitting on the porch in the back, and a girl sat next to me. She was a pretty girl, around 13 or 14 I think. We started talking and I noticed something on her wrist. I asked her what it was, and she showed me that it was cuts. I asked her, "Why do you cut yourself?" She went quiet for a while before telling me, her uncle used to live with my family because he went broke. He shared a room with her brother, and at night he'd come into her room when everyone was asleep. I told her she didn't have to continue, but she said it's okay, and she continued. She told me that he would touch her and make her touch him. He raped her as well. This went on for about a month or so till he moved out. She stayed silent for another 2 months after he left. They went to a family gathering and she saw him. She ended up staying in the car the whole time. Her mom came out about 2 hours later and told her to come inside. She looked at her mom and started crying. Then she started crying and I comforted her. I told her she could stop, but she said no. She shouldn't have to be ashamed to tell her story. She explained to her mom and her mom called the police when they got home. She stopped telling me what happened after that and just said he got arrested and was going to therapy. She never told me her name, but I remember her. She just kind of imprinted on me. It's hard to say what's the worst. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma and many of my childhood friends have died well before their time. One of them was murdered execution style after a bad business deal surrounding a music video. Another forgot to put the parking brake on while making a quick repair on a derrick and it rolled back on him and crushed his head. Another disappeared after a tour in Iraq, just called his wife to say he couldn't come home because he had murdered children. A lot of the ones that are still alive are in prison or in and out of rehab. I've gone through a few things that seemed awful, but I've been very lucky to avoid the worst of it, I think. A friend in high school was hit by a car and dragged a couple of 100 yards before he died. The driver was drunk and on coke. It was 8 a.m. when it happened. My friend was on his way to school. A good friend of mine was shot in the head by an ex-boyfriend. She lived for a few days until her parents took her off life support. The ex holed up in his apartment and went into a standoff until he killed himself. A close friend, single mom with 3 kids, one of her kids was severely autistic. He was setting really aggressive, he was 16-ish, and she didn't know what to do or how to control him. She tried everything. He got worse. Eventually one day when the girls were gone, he raped and murdered her. Me and my 3 other friends were longboarding down this highway and suddenly one of my friend crashed into a tree head first. For some reason his helmet went off before impact. We managed to get him to a hospital as fast as possible. He suffered it, went into a coma and died 2 hours after. This happened 4 years ago, May 28th. My friend was murdered by a psychopath. She set fire to his apartment which had no fire escape, killed his wife, his 2-year-old son and his niece and nephew, both 5 and 7. She went drink in a bar after the attack and was laughing about. Bitch is in prison now and hopefully she will leave in a body bag. A good friend of mine has a sister that lived in the southern US. We're in NY. One day she gets a call that the sister had a bad accident, was in a coma, and probably wouldn't make it. She, along with other family members, go down to see her. Well, she wakes up. At that point her husband told the family they had to leave. The family figured all along that the husband did it, history of abuse, and they figured that the sister would tell what happened and that's why husband made them leave. Eventually sister tells them to leave because she's controlled by her husband. Fast forward to now and sister is here in NY having left the husband with her young daughter. She did finally admit that he did it, but I don't know the details and I don't know if he's been charged with a crime. But she's left with a wobbly gait and no real speech. She has a very low mumble. What's interesting is that the daughter is speaking 3 languages: English, Spanish, her family's native language, and mumble. She imitates her mother's speech. It's kind of sweet actually. And most importantly, she and her mom are safe. She was a victim of domestic abuse. Her parents didn't treat her well because she is their daughter and not their son. She received daily beatings throughout middle school. She is doing a lot better now. Have a loving boyfriend and is doing her master's. A friend of mine's father dropped dead in the middle of her sister's 5th birthday party. 1 minute eating cake and playing games, dead on the floor the next. It was a blood clot or an aneurysm. After he died, her mom tried to get custody of the 3 kids. She was a terrible mom who had lost full custody years earlier. Thankfully tons of family were able to help out and her stepmom, who is a fantastic person, finally got custody. While dealing with all of this, she relied heavily on her high school boyfriend. He was then diagnosed with leukemia and was dead within 6 months of her father. Thankfully she had a great therapist at the time. Stepmom paid for it even before dad passed to help deal with the trauma from her mom. She's now in her early 30s and has become a therapist herself. A friend of mine got shot with a firework. It exploded few milliseconds after impacting his stomach, ripping open his belly. breaking multiple ribs and nearly kill him. He recovered, but still had difficulties with everything: breathing, eating, whatever you normally do without thinking about it. The dude who shot him never got a penalty because there were not enough proof for each person that could have committed the crime. Sorry, missing word, but he lives. That's the most important thing. Several months before it happened, they got drunk and high and he absolutely destroyed her house and then tortured her. He stabbed her, put hot sauce in her eyes, beat her with a belt, and raped her. She broke it off with him after that. We don't know for sure what happened, but he got into her house, and he killed her. I'd never been so numb in my entire life when my wife told me what had happened, and I started thinking about her children. She had lost custody of them and now their mom was gone. I think about her all the time. I drive by her old house whenever I'm in the neighborhood and I still can't believe that happened to my friend. His girlfriend, who he had a 3-year-old daughter with, one day just grabbed everything and the kid and left for a different country, leaving no trace behind her. That was 15 years ago and my friend has been looking for his daughter non-stop. He has a blog where he posts letters for her to find in case she ever Googles her name, but it points out that the mother changed her identity and the daughter's. I can't imagine how that feels. Back a long time ago, growing up in Eastern Europe, before the Cold War was ended, I had a friend who kept getting into trouble: vandalism, stealing from stores, drugs and more. He had been arrested 2 times, but kept thinking he can get away with it. This was back when the farm pit punishment was still used for some crimes, basically where you're locked in a pit on a farm for a day or 2. And the dung of the animals on the farm is shoveled in as well. I warned him that he better stop because he's sure to get the farm pit if he's caught again. He seemed unconcerned and laughed it off, and said something like, "So what, it's just a day or 2, I can deal with a bad smell." I said, "Are you kidding me? Have you even been to a pig farm before? You do not want to go to the pit." But he was undistressed. Sure enough, he was caught shoplifting a few months later and spent half a day in the pit, and later told me how much he puked and how sick he felt. I warned you, buddy. One of my friends was sliding down a railing that was next to a ground storm drain made of concrete. He slipped backwards and cracked his skull open. It was near midnight and we were pretty close to a hospital, so I just kind of picked him up and ran. I hope I never see the inside of someone's head up close again. My friend had a bad trip on some psychedelics, can't remember which one. Left him real messed up for a couple weeks. One night, the terrors kept him up until about 7 a.m. He falls asleep, but has to be up at 9:30 a.m. Ends up driving on the highway headed south. Not a single person knows why to this day. We were told he ended up falling asleep at the wheel and swerving across the median head-on into a passing truck. Both my friend and the other driver were killed instantly. It really sucks because every single person that met him loved him. He was the kindest person I have ever met and could hold a conversation and relate to literally anybody. I truly believe he was one of those 1 in a million kind of people. A friend was walking to middle school. He was bright, charming and a great athlete, an all-around genuine nice guy. He had scoliosis and wore a back brace. He slipped on the curb and fell down. Due to his back brace, he needed to roll over to be able to get up. As he was trying to do so, a garbage truck collecting bins backed up over him, crushing him to death. It's been 40 years and I can still see it in my mind. Not long after that, they added the backup warning beep to the trucks. Not sure if it was because of that incident, but I seem to remember that it was. My friend died of a year-long fight with an invasive brain tumor, found love though. She almost didn't get his insurance because of a false positive on a drug test. No shit, he passed hot for morphine. The doctor gave it to him because he has cancer. But after a long fight with them it went through. Lost another friend when he was home on leave after the war. Died in his driveway. On his way out a semi ran off the road and into him with no brakes. Insurance almost didn't pay out on him because his seat belt wasn't buckled. That can happen if you just got in the car. They awarded it though, not because it was the right thing to do, but because his family's lawyer cited the car was still in park. And even though the keys were in the ignition, the car had not been started. One I didn't fight for, and I damn well should have. And that one eats me up the most. Let him crash at ours when he was between places. While I was out he got drunk and tried to bully my wife into having sex with him. He told her, if you don't I will tell him you did and he will believe me. She suggested he go get some beers first and then locked the doors, hid out at a neighbor's and called me and the cops. Cops got there before I did and couldn't actually arrest him for anything but basically said he should fuck off to somewhere else or we will find a reason to take you to jail. Good thing too, because if I got there first, I would probably gotten arrested for kicking his ass. Grew up in a very religious household, evangelical Christian. Was the youngest of 4 girls. All of her sisters married young and started having babies non-stop due to the nature of their religion. However, she was usually forced to babysit for her sisters, who often would live at home with their parents for long stretches of time due to financial trouble. She loved dogs, and finally got a dog that she loved to death. However, her oldest sister's husband was very cruel to her. He saw her as a servant and sexually harassed her. One day, they got into a huge argument, so he went and got her dog to bite him due to bothering her. He claimed the dog attacked him outright and that he was afraid the dog would bite one of the kids, so her parents got rid of the dog. My friend was absolutely devastated. It wasn't long after that she started doing mission work in other countries. I think it was an excuse to get away from her home. She's doing better now, has a boyfriend and still does mission work. During middle school, going back to home, 4 of my friends got hit by a motorcycle that was hit by a drunk driver in a car. Not sure if police got him cause he ruined away. One of my 4 friends got really bad injured, his right leg was entirely behind the back. Other 3 were not very severely injured, but they took some time to recover from smaller injuries. They were all mentally shocked at time. Committed suicide after a girl falsely claimed he raped her. Co-workers, they flirted non-stop at work, and were always together at after-work stuff. One night, house party of co-workers, they go upstairs, and finally hook up after months of flirting. Problem was, he was a short kind of nerdy guy and not very attractive. Super genuine and nice guy, just short, skinny, with 3 hairs on his chin. Next day at work, she got teased pretty hard by other female co-workers for hooking up with that ugly guy. So she claimed he raped her. Despite it being very mutual. Issue went to HR, police were involved. Dude lost his job, and was facing charges. Hung himself in his apartment. Wasn't found for a while. I tried reaching out, but he wasn't answering his phone door. I had no idea. She was remorseful after he was already dead. She faced no consequences for what she did to him. Guess I'll share my story, not like anyone's gonna read it. Was sexually assaulted at 16, I'm a male, never told anyone. Weeks after it happened I opened up to my girlfriend at the time about it and she was supportive, which was nice. About a month after, we have an extremely ugly breakup for reasons unrelated, but it ends in an intense resentment for me. She spent a whole year after the fact falsely accusing me of raping her, turning all of my friends against me, and ruining my life. We never even had sex. Seriously considering killing myself multiple times. Hell, even attempted a few. I'm 20 now and, While I'm glad I didn't, and I'm in a much more loving and stable relationship, both events left serious unrepairable damage to my mental state. I'm not someone who likes to blame my shitty behavior on other people or things that happened to me, but I miss the person I was before everything went sideways. To this day she still slanders my name and paints herself as the victim to win brownie points and sympathy that she doesn't deserve. I have enough on her to ruin her life back, but what's the point? I'd be no better. Anyway, sorry about your friend. Early 30s male friend got arrested when he had happy time with late 50s Chinese prostitutes at massage parlor. Unusual moment of police raid. His face was shown in several local newspapers and TV2, and the best reply on that news in FB was written by his wife. Brother-in-law beaten to death for a gang initiation at a church Christmas party. They left him under the sink to die. Little did those fuckers know this man is stubborn as hell and pulled through. Spent 3 months in a coma. Lost 70% of his brain function, as well as use of the right side of his body. Went from aspiring professional drummer hockey player to incapable of cutting his own steaks. Never lost his sense of humor or good looks. One of my best friends in college was raped by 4 or 5 guys. She ended up pregnant and with gonorrhea. I took her to get an abortion shortly after and to her clinic appointments. This was the 80s. It never even crossed our minds to report it. I don't know why, other than the fact that there was a lot of rape then, and most women just didn't report them. He left our grandparents' house without saying anything. Thought he was going to get some smokes. He was speeding on his motorcycle as per usual. Someone pulled a U-turn out in front of him and he snapped his neck after getting caught under the rear wheel. I miss you, James. The family feels hollow without you. You were the only person I was overtly excited to see and spend time with. Few of my friends are deep into the life of slanging drugs. Beat a few people, but that's about as far as it went for a while. Some guys break into his house while his girl's over. They wanted drugs and money or some shit, but he didn't keep any of that at his house. They raped his girl and made him watch. They turned that man into a stone-cold killer, and there it would be no exaggeration to say my boy died that day. Not even sure if he killed the right people or anything, but he racked up a murder charge or 2 before it caught up with him. Miss his ass though. She was probably the happiest and most open person I know. Our mentally abusive ex falsely accused her of rape and she's spiraled into severe depression and suicidality. She is so deep into his trap that he still blames herself for any pain she's caused him. She gave him unconditional love and affection, and all he gave her was abuse and a fucking false rape accusation. That is all for this time. Subscribe, and you'll get much more interesting stories.